Yeah, it's rewind time.
5 years ago, I made a game called Dank Attack. This was the first time ever I made something that wasn't your generic CMD kind of game. I think I made one game called Flippy Goes Shopping, but this was the first actual game that I made with graphics and input where you could actually move inside of the game and so on. It was a very, very stupid game where basically you had to dodge these falling pink monsters, and I think you could kill them as well, and there was a high score adding up for how long you survived. A few years later, I also remade this game into a very different type of game, but same with the still kind of monsters and stupid feel to the game with really, really shitty art. So after playing the second game that I made, we're gonna try making a newer, better version 5 years later from when I released this game. So here we go. This is the Dank Attack 2, the second version of the game that I made several years later. It's a top-down kind of very Crimson Land looking type of game where you get attacked by these tanks and you just kind of have to shoot them. Everything in this game is very memey and kind of intentionally broken. This is kind of the whole game. You will see these pink things following you, trying to hit you. You need to shoot them. I must say I'm pretty happy with the reload animation here where you just kind of spin your weapon, and it is kind of satisfying to shoot because of how bouncy the gun is. Here's the perk selection. Now we get to choose between two of them. Let's do shoot faster. But yeah, this is basically the entire core loop of the game. So my plan for today is to make something with the same kind of stupid art type of feel, but and also with the danks need to look the same, the character needs to have some type of similarities to the original character, but that's about it. Then I have a lot of freedom on how to do the rest. So I'm gonna attempt making a new version 5 years later that is somewhat better than the second version. First things first, we gotta draw some characters for the game. These characters are heavily inspired by the last games. I only had to update them to allow for smoother animation and to fit better with the rest of the art style. Even though I'm not an artist, I still want to show my development over the last few years. The characters are now into the game and I'm ready to scrap the old ones. Having loose arms and legs makes it super easy and smooth to animate, and when connecting bones through the Unity animation package, it's starting to look like a AAA game. These are the animations I made. I don't want to spend too much time on them, so they're gonna have to work. After all, we have a bunch of other animations to make. I figured the game would need some ground for the characters to stand on, so I spent a whole 2 minutes in Photoshop creating this field of grass. And yes, it's a field of grass. Anyone who sees a bland green square is milk gang, aka cringe. After caressing my keyboard, some code appeared and movement started working. Flying when spamming the jump button became a thing, which it shouldn't have, so after a while it wasn't anymore. There was also this bug making the character into Spider-Man, except Spider-Man sticks to walls with his hands and this guy just kinda does it with his forehead. I then implemented some jumping and falling animations to make the movement feel a bit more fluid. At this point it felt pretty nice just to jump around, so I decided to leave the movement as it was and move on. Next up, I wrote about 4 lines of code that made the camera follow the player in a smooth manner. Though no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't make it run smoother than pulp-free orange juice. Also noticed some weird stuff going on with the falling animation, but it was funny so I didn't fix it. After that, I felt it was time to make the danks start following the player. They started out a little too slow, but trust me, they will get faster. Much faster. They also learned how to jump by themselves. Now they started getting more and more unpredictable, and I liked it. Until they started flying too. As if they weren't creepy enough, I had to animate them to make them look like something that would crawl out of your wardrobe at 3 AM while you're sleeping. Their animations also introduced this nice little dance. Now it was time to start shooting, so I started getting animations ready for holding guns. This took me way too long to figure out because apparently rigged 2D characters do not like having their bones and joints played around with in code, so I had to create 2 separate arms which I could control through code. So fun fact, this character secretly has 4 arms, or 5 depending on how you look at it. After T-posing a whole lot, you could now propel the T-pose, which felt more of a step backwards than getting closer to the result I wanted. The second iteration made the arm swing the opposite way of what I wanted, but somehow that gave me hope I was on the right track. Third try, I managed to, oh no, I guess not. After trying so hard and getting so far, I made the arms point towards the cursor. Small step for the man, but a big step for the solo developer. After arms go whoosh, it was gun go poof time. This time I got it right the first time. This time I got it right the first time. Pointing the gun in the right direction was now a working feature. Speaking of gun go poof, here's the gun going poof 60 times a second. Intentional, of course. Here's the gun going poof 60 times a second in the wrong direction. I'm now having second thoughts about my career as a game developer. After a few tweaks here and there, the gun is shooting once a second in the right direction. Kind of. I also thought it was annoying to constantly bump into the platforms while jumping, so I tweaked the collision to only work from above, made it much easier to jump onto the platforms. I then got a sudden urge to make some new art for the game, so I made some grass that I later on put on every single object in the scene, and to my surprise it didn't make the game look even worse. It was now time to caress my keyboard again, and the buttons I pressed actually turned into a working health bar. There's no joke embedded here, it actually worked. I figured the danks needed some dank particles as well, so they got a pink confetti burst on death. I was pretty happy with where the art was going, so I upgraded the project to the 2D light system and made everything look real cozy and nice. I then drew some lines that turned out to be lampposts, attached a light to the object, and there was a working light, in 2D. To make the light more apparent, I duplicated the ground and shoved it in as a background, and the sky is green. Then I got a brilliant idea to add recoil feedback to my weapon, and just as you'd expect, it worked flawlessly the first time I ran my code. Even after tweaking my fully working code, it was still working, as you would expect. Since the code was working so well, I decided to tweak it a third time, and it was finally still working as expected. And instead of holding the gun upside down and aiming backwards as only a boner would do, I swapped the sprite around so the gun is turned the same way no matter where you're aiming. Speaking of holding things and aiming backwards, here's the new gun that I made. After dropping my Nintendo Switch on the keyboard, the gun was working as intended. Though, as a side effect, the character could now fly again. Here's me shooting at a wall. So, I like particles and particles like me. I put some particles into the game and it looked pretty sweet, to be honest. I realized it was also annoying not knowing how much ammo you had left, so I threw in some text displaying your ammo and a neat toss weapon animation to go with it. I also started making some particles for a pickup object that could act as a source for new weapons, health and more. I did this by making some pointy, half-transparent sprites in Photoshop and tweaked a bunch of values in the particle system. Naturally, new features bring new bugs, and the pickups were no exception.
Unity, you can't just crash on me like that.
Haha, editor goes brrr.
I wrote some anti-crashing code and the pickup started working as expected. I then had some problems with danks breaking the game to the point where I could count the FPS on one hand. I did some googling and I was told to download 2 packages from the package manager. I was expecting this to corrupt all the work that I've done so far, and it almost did. But after updating one of the packages, the lag just disappeared. That's what I call a pro game developer move. I made the pickups have a chance of spawning when killing danks instead of manually having to place them down. I also made the danks fall from the sky, like they did in the game I made 5 years ago. And the game now had a somewhat working core loop. Only issue was I only had one weapon and the game didn't feel too interesting. I thought some more feedback seemed sensible, so I added a kill counter and the danks got a nice particle effect when landing from the sky. They also started shooting some pink cluster of particles that bounces and deals damage on impact, because why not? At this point I thought it would be a good idea to start scaling up the difficulty based on your progression. I cheated and simulated a session with 800 danks killed, and I proved to myself you should never trust your initial values when balancing a game. I then made the game about 4 times easier, and I also added a new pickup. This pickup makes your bullets go through enemy and terrain, meaning you could deal damage to more than 1 dank with 1 bullet. I also added a red pickup that restores your health, which was very much needed. Next up, I made some big changes to the level. I added more platforms, more light, and then removed the big brown walls that I put up in the beginning for a reason that I can't even remember at this point. I added a third gun that shoots bouncing bullets, and I made the danks deal damage to you if they land on you after falling from the sky. Logically, that should hurt pretty bad. The game was starting to feel more and more complete, so I decided to add a final gun. My absolute favorite, the big boy mega shooter. This one was extremely satisfying to use and I couldn't stop playtesting once this one was implemented. Because of how the game's difficulty scaled, I had to add a helping hand for when the game gets too intense. I added a damage multiplier that goes up when you kill danks in a short amount of time, giving the player a chance to deal with hordes of danks. The damage multiplier scales endlessly, so at some point you end up one-shotting the danks, but I realized it doesn't matter because they spawn ridiculously fast once you progress far enough. This is the end result, and honestly I'm very happy with the game considering the amount of time I spent on it. I might implement some menus and stuff, final touches at a later point, and release it if anyone is interested. But for now that's actually it. If we can hit 3 likes on this video, I will buy a pair of pink sunglasses and drink some orange juice. Thank you guys, take care.